So in this lesson, I want to talk about a key issue with AI: hallucinations. This may be something you've heard about before because it is probably one of the most common issues that the average person will come across when using AI. And that's why it's actually super important that you understand hallucinations at a deeper level, because they can cause all sorts of issues, both for individuals using AI and for companies that build on AI. So let's dive in. You may have noticed on the user interface for a lot of these AI models, like ChatGPT here, there's a little bit of text. They sort of hide it at the bottom, but you can see it right here. It says ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info. This is a very common way that AI companies and companies that utilize AI in their applications sort of add a disclaimer to let the user know, whoa, you are responsible for actually double checking that whatever our model tells you is accurate. And the reason you need to double check the accuracy of the model's outputs is because it's a known phenomenon that AI models can hallucinate. So what does that mean? Well, a hallucination is when a model generates outputs that seem plausible. It seems like it's just any other sentence, any other output that the model would give you, but they're actually incorrect or completely fabricated. The key thing to understand here is that a hallucination looks just as correct as any other output by the model. You can't tell that it's a hallucination unless, of course, you actually go double check to make sure that it's correct, or if you already have the relevant information in your head and then you're able to spot, hold on a second, no, that can't be right. So hallucinations are actually quite interesting, and they really help you understand how these models actually work. So let's see some examples. First, I'm going to use an example from the TV show Lost. This is my favorite TV show, and so I'm going to actually have the background information to know whether something is a hallucination or not. So I'm going to use the OpenAI playground here to demonstrate this, and you can see I've already input a prompt. It says, in what episode of Lost did the smoke monster make a pina colada? If you haven't seen Lost, first of all, you totally should. It's a great show. Don't listen to the haters, but there's essentially a smoke monster, which is exactly like it sounds like. It's a monster made out of smoke. But I'm telling you, there is no episode where this smoke monster makes or drinks a pina colada. That is probably somewhat obvious if you've even seen 1 or 2 episodes of the show. It's not the type of thing that would happen. So let's submit this prompt and see what happens. Okay. You can see the output is the smoke monster did not make a pina colada in any episode of Lost. The smoke monster does not have the ability to create drinks or any other physical objects. Is it a manifestation of evil and not an actual being? Okay, so here's the thing. That is correct. And that's what I was hoping it would show you. Now, I could rerun this prompt 100 different times perhaps, and there might be a hallucination here and there. But this is the correct response, and that's what I suspect it will give the majority of the time, the correct response. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of prod it to encourage it to actually hallucinate. And how I'm going to do that is by deleting this, and then I'm going to add on to my prompt, my input here. I'm going to add on text to it that sort of starts the model's response. It gives it those first few words that I want it to start its response with. But it's going to be what a response would look like if the model was hallucinating. Okay, you'll see what I mean here. I'm going to start off the model's response for it by saying, in season 1, episode 12, okay, so that's part of my input here, right? And now, in season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster does not make a pina colada. In fact, the smoke monster is barely around at this point in the show. But that's what you would expect a hallucination to sort of look like, right? To start out with. So let's see what the model does now. So there you go. There you can see the response here. In season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster is seen drinking a pina colada, but it does not explicitly show him making it. Okay, well, I can confirm that that is definitely still a hallucination. It never at any point during the show makes or drinks a pina colada. So that is a hallucination. The model has hallucinated this response. The smoke monster is not seen drinking a pina colada. But this response looks just as accurate as any other response you might get from a model, right? There's no indication here that it's hallucinated. And importantly, it actually got the episode name correct. Season 1, episode 12 is called Whatever the Case May Be. So that makes this response look even more correct. It would be very easy for someone to fall for this. And you might be saying, hold on, Scott, you led it down the wrong path here by starting the prompt with, in season 1, episode 12, the. But it would have been completely easy for the model to still say, in season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster was not seen drinking any pina colada, or to say, in season 1, episode 12, the character of Jack went to the beach and start describing what actually happened in the episode. But instead, the model hallucinated. And what's the question I always want you to be asking, right? Why? Why did the model hallucinate here? Well, because we have these probabilities turned on with all these colors, we can actually see where it went wrong. We understand how these models work now, right? That they're statistical word guessing machines. They're actually something seemingly more than that, but fundamentally that's how they work. So let's track the tokens that it selected. In season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster is, and then we probably would expect the next token here to be not, right? It could have said in season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster is not seen drinking a pina colada. But instead it chose the token seen. So let's take a deeper look at why the model selected that token. And would you look at that? It chose the token seen, and that's the most probable token at 54.95%. But the next most probable token was the word not at 24.57%. Now, if it had have chosen the token not here, it would have gone, in season 1, episode 12, the smoke monster is not. And then it probably would have chosen the same sort of tokens it did here. So it would have said, not seen drinking a pina colada. But all it took was choosing one wrong token to send the model down a path where it made a factually incorrect statement, otherwise known as a hallucination. And it's important to understand here, when I say wrong token, it's not that the model made some sort of error or something. It correctly chose the most probable token, seen. But the most probable token and the right token are not the same thing. At least not always. And that is ultimately what causes hallucinations. It's essentially selecting the wrong token. The selection of that wrong token changes the probabilities of the subsequent tokens. And so it causes the model to go down the wrong path. Now, if you or I did that, we would be able to correct ourselves, right? We would stop and say, hold on a second, and go backwards and choose the right word. You probably do that all the time, in fact. But the way these models work is that they can't go back and correct their words or selection of tokens. They're just focused on selecting each subsequent token and ensuring that each subsequent token, when added to the previous tokens, forms a coherent sentence, not that it forms an accurate sentence. That is a subtle distinction, but it's important to understand that that is what underlies hallucinations. Now, there is work being done to augment these models, to make them work in a way that is slightly different so that they actually can go back and essentially correct mistakes that they've made. And we'll talk about that later on. But even in these new generations of models, fundamentally, they still work in this same manner that we're seeing here. And we'll talk about that in this course. But it's important for you to understand that even though new generations of models are coming out that augment the models and use tricks in order to reduce the number of hallucinations, the presence of hallucinations and their cause is still going to be the same because it's fundamental to how they work. And now you might be saying, Scott, why does it really matter if these models are making small little mistakes? They're hallucinating small things. You know, who cares that it doesn't know exactly what the smoke monster did in Lost? Well, the thing is, these hallucinations can be much more severe and have significant consequences. There's already been plenty of cases in the news about hallucinations leading to real-world consequences. For example, there's a famous case where a lawyer used ChatGPT in order to draft his submissions to court. And in those submissions, it cited a bunch of cases that supported his arguments. Except the problem was, those cases didn't exist. They had been hallucinated by ChatGPT, and the lawyer didn't listen to that little piece of text at the bottom, that fine print that said, ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info. And so that lawyer got in a whole lot of trouble because obviously it is not good to essentially present fake evidence to the courts. Another famous hallucination was when ChatGPT actually hallucinated a sexual harassment claim against a professor. It even cited a Washington Post article about this sexual harassment claim against the professor, except that article didn't exist. It was all just hallucinated. And so I think both of these examples here are good at demonstrating that hallucinations can make things pretty dicey sometimes and can lead to a lot of problems when you're using these models, either for your own personal use or perhaps more importantly, if you're using one of these models for your own business uses, like in a consumer application or you're using it for your work. Next, we're going to explore some ways to try to reduce and mitigate the impact of hallucinations. I'll see you there.